Welcome to the November 2025 edition of the FO Exclusive. Happy Thanksgiving to all our American friends. This is the day before Thanksgiving. Before we carry on, let's give you a reminder. Last month, we covered three topics. Israel and Hamas agree to a ceasefire. Number two, yet another US government shutdown. Number three, the new geopolitics of East Asia and the Pacific. And we can pat ourselves on the back. We were a little ahead of the curve. The new geopolitics of Asia, East Asia and the Pacific is something we will cover, but more on that later. So this month, this November, what has happened? Well, we've seen high drama in America. Dick Cheney died. I'm sure, Glenn, you're very sad. The Jeffrey Epstein scandal rages on. Marjorie Taylor Greene is gone, or rather is going. She claims she was cast aside by MAGA Inc. and replaced by neocons, big pharma, big tech, military-industrial war complex, foreign leaders, and the elite donor class that can't even relate to real Americans. That's a ringing endorsement.
The poor woman.
Yeah, the poor woman. Okay. Democrats won in Virginia, New Jersey, and New York City. Zohran Mamdani, a new Miss You Bling Bling with nice rings and handbands. He quoted Jawaharlal Nehru in his victory speech, and he played brash Bollywood music after his speech. The very song Dhoom Machale was Make an Explosion. I wonder how that goes down in Texas and Mississippi. But anyway, hey-ho, there we go. Later, he flew down. He didn't take the train. He didn't take the Amtrak, unlike Joe Biden. He flew down for a photo op with Donald Trump. And the two celebrities seemed to get along just fine, despite calling each other wonderful names in the past. So more theater, more political theater, a hyper-real world, if we can quote Peter Isaacson. Anyway, despite having election victories in the states, Democrats voted with Republicans, or some Democrats voted with Republicans to end the government shutdown. The left in the Democratic Party now wants to get rid of Chuck Schumer in the Senate. I met some of them at the National Press Club. One or two of them even wished disease and suffering on Schumer. So emotions must clearly be running high. Centrist Democrats think that the left has lost the plot. So not only are Republicans and Democrats battling each other, but they are battling their own fellow party members. So there are civil wars within civil wars. As Glenn, you always say, the US is more polarized today than at any time since the Cold War, or since the Civil War, sorry.
That's Civil War, 150 years. Yeah,
exactly. You've said that time and again, and I concur. From the emotion I'm seeing in Washington, D.C., within the Republican Party and within the Democratic Party, against their own colleagues, leave aside against each other, it is the most toxic I have seen since I first came to Washington, D.C. My very first visit was 2008, and then, of course, 2010. I've been living here off and on, so this is quite new. The intensity is new. It was always polarized, but the intensity is
and here I'll give a counterpoint to the statement that I have made, or the position I have asserted, many times. 60, what is now 2025? So 60 years ago, 70 years ago, my father, who was involved in local politics, was denounced as a communist, in part because he was a strong advocate of putting fluoride in the water supply so that children wouldn't get cavities. But that was proof of communism then. And today, my colleagues of mine and I, involved in my little community here, have had the characterization of communist electricity. We were promoting communist electricity because we had the foolishness to suggest that a windmill could generate electrons for use in the power grid. So perhaps there's continuity as well as polarization.
Change. Brilliant. Okay. Well, perhaps a military action against Venezuela will provide the uniting glue. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest warship, has arrived in Latin American waters to fight drug smuggling. And as Glenn pointed out earlier to me, it denudes US strength in the Middle East and extending up to Eastern Europe. But anyway, rumors are rife in Washington, D.C., where I sit, about Secretary of State Marco Rubio wanting to get rid of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro. Venezuela's neighbor, Colombia, is not very happy. The Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, who made news by giving a speech when he came to New York to visit the UN, he then had his visa revoked. He has stopped intelligence sharing with the US. And remember, Colombia has been a loyal US ally, so this is quite big. Moving across the pond, the BBC is in big trouble. The Director General.
I work very closely with Colombian counterparts, diplomats and officials, and they were very impressive people. Some of my warmest recollections of my career were working with them, and that is not an empty act or loss on the part of them, and a sign of the unfortunate is a gentle word. Direction that things are going. We aren't going to talk about this today, I know, but I can't resist. Sending the aircraft carrier to the Caribbean now is really, once again, an example of supply side counter-narcotics policy, meaning that, and this is primarily the Republican approach and has been for 60 years, that if we kill the people or at least stop the people who are supplying the drugs, well, then the problem will go away. And the Democrats, without too much simplification, have argued for a demand side approach, which is that so long as there is a demand, there will be a supply. Prices will rise or fall, but there will be a supply. And in fact, that's a law of the drug trade as well as a law of economics and human nature. And I worked on counter-narcotics during my career, and I spoke to the head of all of the relevant military, counter-narcotics officials, law enforcement officials in the U.S., and I will quote one of them, a very senior person, who said to me that all of the efforts by all of the governments of whatever party in the United States since President Nixon declared a war on drugs in the early 1970s had not changed the price of any drug on any street in America. Because so long as there is a demand, there will be a supply. And to stop the drug smuggling is fundamentally and functionally impossible to do. So good luck to the aircraft carrier. Okay.
Excellent. So, moving across the pond, the BBC is in big trouble. The Director General had to resign. It turns out that the Beeb, as the UK's venerable media flagship is informally called, had stitched together two separate parts of Donald Trump's speech on January 6, 2021. Apparently, this created an untrue impression of his remarks ahead of the storming of the US Capitol. Now, critics have long accused the BBC of turning left-wing and even woke, and Trump has threatened to sue this woke BBC or left-wing BBC for
This is accusing editors of trying to stitch together something that a sentence that actually would contain a subject, a verb, and an object in one sequence.
Excellent. So now, after threatening to sue the BBC, or In between threatening to sue the BBC, Trump has been playing host. Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, now known as Ahmad al-Shara, and he has exchanged his battle fatigues for a suit. He visited the White House, and so did Mohammed bin Salman, MBS. Trump enjoyed the company of these tall, good-looking men. He's commented at least about one of them being tall, good-looking, and having excellent skin. We haven't got that compliment yet, Glenn.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
He gave Jolani a perfume, in fact, sprayed it on Jolani. It made for excellent television. And he defended MBS when a journalist, an impertinent journalist, asked the question about strangling and then the chopping up of Jamal Khashoggi. And Donald Trump jumped into the rescue like a valiant knight, like a knight in shining armor for a damsel in distress. And he said that, look, ABC is fake news. And the reporter was wrong in embarrassing a guest of America for a controversial and unlikable journalist. Besides, MBS has done a great job. And more importantly, he's investing tons of cash in the US. Later, of course, Cristiano Ronaldo, later or maybe the night earlier, and Elon Musk attended the dinner Trump hosted for MBS. Now, Elon Musk, of course, wants the billions from MBS, and Cristiano Ronaldo is getting millions to play in Saudi Arabia from MBS. So, hey-ho, there we go. The world as we live in, lovely, wonderful. And another guest arrived in the White House. His name is Viktor Orban. He's quite urbane. He's quite a sophisticated chap. Maybe not sophisticated, but he's canny and clever and cunning and is fluent in English. And he managed to secure an opt-out from America's sanctions on Russian oil. Now, note, Hungary relies on Russian imports for cheap energy. And of course, to secure this deal, Orban agreed to buy more American liquefied natural gas. So more LNG sales to Hungary, but Hungary can continue to get Russian gas. Excellent. Now, close to Hungary is a country called Turkey. It is ruled by Recep Tayyip Erdogan. I call him Sultan. He's president, but he's really a new Ottoman, and he's the new Sultan. And his prosecutors said that they would seek a prison sentence of up to 2,352 years for Ekrem İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul, who by all accounts is a decent mayor and is the main challenger. Should the next election come around, should he manage to stay out of jail. And he's in detention for a trial for alleged corruption. So there you go. Turkey, is certainly going, I suppose, hot Turkey, if not cold Turkey, or cold Turkey on the idea of democracy. Let's talk about bombs very briefly going off in both Delhi and Islamabad. In Bangladesh, a court has sentenced Sheikh Hasina, who was president or prime minister. She was president, prime minister until recently, to death. The ruling Bharatiya Janata Party has won elections in the poor state of Bihar. Critics say that transferring rupees $10,000, basically 15% of the per capita income, to every woman, to every woman's bank account in the state help. So you can buy the election. And India now has competitive populism. Glenn and I will talk more about that another time, and the socialism more inherent in the Indian structure. Jihadists are on the ascendant in Mali. They blockaded the capital Bamako. They executed some social media influencer. Armed bandits abducted more than 300 students and a dozen teachers from St. Mary's private Catholic school in Nigeria. So Donald Trump can intervene on behalf of Christians in Nigeria now, I suppose. And perhaps notably, if you believe in, not if you believe, if you're interested in trade, if you're interested in business, and if you're interested in how things are working in international relations, the Trump administration reached a framework trade agreement with Switzerland. Tariffs on Swiss imports go down from 39% to 15%. So our dear friend, Ralph Heckner, congratulations. He's the ambassador to the US. He's a fantastic diplomat, untiring, polite, conscientious, was training to be a skier, a competitive skier, and was a competitive mountain runner, but now is a diplomat. Anyway, the deal, however, is very simple. Just like Japan, just like the EU, Swiss companies will invest in the US. They will invest 200 billion, 50 billion from Roche, 23 billion from Novartis. Jameson Greer, the US trade representative, claims that this would help America reduce its deficits in pharmaceuticals and other key sectors. Of course, the Swiss are being criticized. Guy Parmelin, the Swiss economy minister, has been accused of selling the Swiss soul to the devil. He insists that's not the case. Anyway, now we come to the three main topics of the month. And today we are going to talk about number one, Donald Trump's peace deal to end the Russia-Ukraine war. Number two, China-Japan tensions rise to dangerous levels. And ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking about this for a while. Sorry to hoot our own trumpet. And number three, rising concerns over stock market bubble. So number one, Donald Trump's peace deal to end the Russia-Ukraine war. Take it away, Glenn.
I am speechless. Colleagues of mine and I used to say to each other, it was a standard line, as it were, in the CIA decades ago, that the government could save a lot of money. And some of our colleagues on Fair Observer will smile at this. I'm thinking of one in particular. The government could save a lot of money if they fired all of us and simply gave a subscription of The Economist to all the policymakers, all of the policymakers or parliamentarians in the United States government. I suppose that is debatable. Today, one might simply suggest that instead of reading the news and following all of these issues, that based on Atul's canvas of the current issues, all we need to do is to read Joseph Heller and Catch-22 or Jonathan Kennedy O'Toole in A Confederacy of Dunces, or the Flashman novels, whichever is more absurd than the other and farcical, and then you'll have an insight into actually the lunacy that we're living, which is gravely disturbing for anyone who is rational of just about any political persuasion. The things have come undone and are not stitching together economically, although that hasn't yet exploded. Certainly politically, we know, internationally, and so on. So let's talk about what Atul misnamed the Donald Trump peace deal. Actually, it's a 28. Initially, it was a 28-point plan, and some astute observers, when they first read it, thought, "Well, this is very stilted English," and it appears that it is actually Russian, and that is not a joke. That is not a joke. This is not some skit on late night television. But a number of linguists.
And that's our next career, Glenn. We should be on late night television soon.
Boy. Oh my God. A number of linguists and diplomats and other experts have read the text in ostensibly American English, and said this really does sound like it has been directly translated from the Russian. And that is literally true. That is what happened. The Russians provided through Donald Trump's, quote, envoy, unquote, the real estate developer from southern Florida.
Who's a brilliant man. Don't laugh at him.
That's correct. Look where he is and look where we are.
He's made more money than us.
In probably 2 minutes, he has, yes. But that's not hard in my case to earn more money than I have. But
I'm even poorer than you, so that's quite easy in my case. You can work for McDonald's and beat me.
So the truth appears to be that Russia provided the Americans with what they thought would be an acceptable peace arrangement, and then the Americans translated it and are presenting it as Trump's plan. This didn't go over well in a lot of places, even among some of Trump's supporters in the American Congress. And the initial plan, which had 28 points, has been somewhat modified. But fundamentally, the essence of the plan really is Russia's starting position. And I will tell you quite seriously, and I think everyone will know this, whether you're a businessman or a negotiator in politics, that whoever wields the pen, whoever drafts and frames the initial points of discussion has won the argument almost, because everyone then is reacting to what you have presented as the framework for discussion and decision. You can revise it entirely, but almost always the essence of and direction of the debate and the decisions will then be far closer to the original drafter's intent than to those who are reacting to, or on their back foot diplomatically and at the negotiating table. And that is what has happened. Now, fundamentally, what is the prospective agreement say? And rather than peace agreement, frankly, this will amount to a ceasefire of perhaps long duration, but rather than a peace agreement. Both sides, it appears, are going to agree to stop shooting, at least for the time being. Well, it would require Ukraine to withdraw from territory that it still controls. Now, the Ukrainians have said that this is a non-starter, but there seems to be, bending and hewing and debating and slicing of that. So there probably will be some territorial adjustments from where
to be fair, Glenn, the Ukrainians, they have their backs to the wall and a gun to their head. When it comes to their economy has cratered. When it comes to men, they have run out of men. There are desertions in front lines. When it comes to equipment, that's not any more forthcoming from the US. When it comes to intelligence sharing, they are scared that Trump only did once briefly. If Trump stops intelligence sharing and stops any kind of assistance, even technical, then they would be even more vulnerable. So they are caught between their own precarious and perilous condition and the dependence on the US. And add to it is this terrible corruption scandal raging at the heart of government. So the Ukrainians do not have any good cards at the moment. So what can they do? They have to go along with Donald Trump.
There are strong incentives and imperatives that push them towards finding some way to stop the war. Certainly. I'm not, as we've frequently noted as you and I talk about this, I'm not as negative or alarmist about Ukraine's prospects, but certainly everything you said is there's at least a large measure of truth to everything you have said. But they have said, well, there's no reason nonetheless for us to cede. We won't cede territory that we continue to control. It appears there will be some sort of territorial adjustments, although I would suspect less substantial than the Russian position, which is to give us all the Russian-speaking provinces, which is the Luhansk and Donetsk provinces, oblasts. They control all of Luhansk, the Russians. They control most of Donetsk, and they're demanding the remainder of it. I would be surprised were that to occur, but that's a sticking point now. In exchange, Ukraine would receive, quote, security guarantees. However, these are unspecified and verbal, and we literally have seen this before. The Europeans and the Americans and the Minsk Accords in 2014 provided, and the Russians accepted and acknowledged and recognized
Glenn,
security guarantees.
There's a catch. Should Ukraine act unilaterally against Russia, the guarantees are off. That's also in the document. And that is the important thing. It is as if the US has done an about-turn, a U-turn, a volte-face, you'd say, and the Ukrainians face the prospect of being sold down the Dnipro River, which actually the Russians want as the natural border. And I suspect that the Russians would want to take Odessa as well at some point. That's the one place they'd probably cross the river. But very much Ukraine, Ukraine is in a pretty tough spot.
But the security guarantees that Ukraine has always argued for, because otherwise they say, this has happened before multiple times. It will, of course, happen again. So what guarantees do we have? And they were given them in 2014. We saw where that led. That led to today. They were given in the 1991, I guess it was, when the Soviet Union broke up and Ukraine surrendered its nuclear weapons. And that didn't, the guarantees didn't amount to much then either. Russia has demanded that Ukraine never be part of NATO. That appears to be conceded. But the Europeans are pushing now. They've injected themselves as best they can into this process, which is not too much, that there may be some, quote, non-NATO but West European troops in Ukraine as a tripwire security guarantee. Russia wanted Ukraine's military limited to 100,000 people, which is essentially a constabulary. The current Ukrainian military is 850,000.
Wasn't that the same number? Wasn't that the same number that the Allies imposed on Germany post Versailles? 100,000, if I remember correctly.
That's right. I think that's right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Which the Germans never respected. And one could hope that the Ukrainians prove as astute as the Germans did. But it now appears that the Russians have.
Do you really want the Ukrainians to go the same path as Nazi Germany? Come on.
No. But it does appear the Russians have made some sort of a concession here, and it's shaping up to be a Ukrainian military limit of about 600,000, which is actually a realistic number. They're currently $850,000. They cannot afford it. If they aren't fighting, there is no need to have such a large military. So 600,000 actually would seem to be a reasonable, significant number. And numbers are meaningless anyway.
You take a far more benign view. You take a far more benign view than Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell, who had their knickers in a knot. I listened to them yesterday, and they were talking about the US has sold out on liberal democracy, on human rights, on state sovereignty, and they were just short of foaming at their mouths.
Well, I haven't got to my explode yet in indignation section. Fundamentally, I think that I agree. Just going over the details can seem bloodless, certainly. Rather than go through all of these points, none of which are yet formally decided, the larger point is that you'll have what most people anticipated, sensibly, which is that when the war ends, authority extends to, and sovereignty, to paraphrase Stalin, I think, or Mao, it's Mao, I guess, to the, that's right, we went through this once before, to the extent that you have military forces in control of an area.
Oh, through the barrel of a gun.
Yeah, and so you'll have mostly a ceasefire with the forces remaining in place, which means that Russia will have absorbed 90% of the Russian-speaking territories of Ukraine. Ukraine won't formally acknowledge that or accept that, but de facto can do nothing about it. The security guarantees for Ukraine may amount to the substance of some European soldiers who are not wearing NATO shoulder patches, and some American or NATO planes deployed to Poland. And then there was talk of unfreezing half of Russia's frozen assets and using that money for Ukrainian development. However, it appears that what that would mean in practice is that Donald Trump would have the money put into, quote, American bank accounts of some sort. So it would benefit the United States. And who knows if the Ukrainians would get, a number two pencil out of the entire thing. So it is fundamentally a ceasefire. It doesn't, and important to mention is that many of the clauses are steps to rehabilitate Russia and bring Russia back into the international community, and a member of the G8 once again, and various international fora, the end of sanctions. So it is a ceasefire that benefits Russia, de facto acknowledges the areas it has conquered, has no further sanctions, lets them off the hook for that. And the guarantees for Ukraine are verbal, slightly more than that, and survival for the time being, which will probably be for the medium term. Medium term is 2 to 10 years, I suppose, because Russia has its own serious economic and military pressures and struggles, and the killing will stop. So it is largely a pro-Moscow shaped ceasefire.
Yeah, one could argue that, and which is what a lot of analysts are saying, that there will be an increased threat to the Baltic states. Russia will become emboldened after this. One argument, the extreme argument that the French defense, the French chief has said, is that French mothers should prepare to lose their children. There is a major confrontation with Russia coming. Rory Stewart said that the drumbeats of war, not exactly in these as many words, are now sounding. We are preparing, we are basically headed to war. That is one view. There is another view that one hears here among some people in the Pentagon and some people in the Republican establishment, that, look, the real enemy is China. Let's do a reverse Henry Kissinger. Let's wean off Russia from China and isolate China. And we have to end the war to do so. Besides, Ukraine is corrupt and Ukraine is not much of a benefit anymore to us. So this is a realpolitik decision.
All of which is profoundly offensive MAGA propaganda garbage, which comes halfway out of Moscow and distorts reality to the point that I almost want to. It's unrelated to reality. The change, the pivot towards China, it won't happen. China, it would be an issue whether.
No, they say Russia will pivot to the US. They think they can wean Russia off. And their grand strategy, Glenn, is that basically China is very vulnerable when it comes to energy. China imports almost, not all, but most of its energy. And if they can block the Malacca Strait, and if the Russians don't supply energy to China, then China is toast within weeks, not months.
Yeah, that's all delusional craziness, which would lead to world war. World War. However, I would like to make one point rather than just to explode in frustration. That's what I think is such nonsense. Is that the Russians made a terrible strategic error in their invasion, and in a way, from the Russian perspective, they felt they didn't have a choice. What do I mean? Not only that the war has gone much worse for Russia than it had imagined it would, but the war came because of a failure of Russia's other strategic policy, which has been elsewhere dramatically successful. Russia tried, not through war, but through covert action and disinformation and aggressive intelligence operations, to stop Ukraine's turn to the West and to have essentially a puppet government and regime in Ukraine. And they failed because of the desire of the Ukrainian people, thus the invasion. However, Russia, they're no dummies. And I don't agree that war is likely with Russia for Europe or for the US. But what is certain and is already ongoing is what we are seeing in Moldova, in Georgia, in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, in Ukraine, in the Baltics, in Poland, and to include the United States, England, and France, but in particular the states bordering the Russia, and that is destabilization and actions to install favorably inclined political figures in the country's political processes. And that has happened
what is the CIA doing to counter it?
Large amounts of success. Sorry?
What is the CIA doing to counter it, Glenn? It's a game two can play.
Well, one would hope that they are, and I can only give historic examples. In post-war Italy, the United States, the CIA, was, and to this day, remains roundly denounced by right-thinking people, as in correctly thinking people, theoretically, for its interference in the Italian political process. And it is true that the CIA spent, I think it was $20 million in 1948 to affect the elections so that there would be a pro-democratic official or party elected rather than the communists who were, by definition, not Democrats.
The CIA also intervened in Greece. The CIA also intervened in Greece big time.
I'm just giving the one example of Italy to make the point. Yeah. It's true that the United States spent $20 million. What isn't, for various reasons, has not created the same amount of outrage or concern or even consciousness, is that the KGB spent $200 million. So that's what's happening in Central and Eastern Europe today. What the CIA is doing, I don't know, but for all of the covert actions the CIA has engaged in and probably is engaging in, the CIA is acutely conscious of how likely it is that a covert action burns those who perpetrate it rather than warms those who it is seeking to affect. Okay.
So moving swiftly on, or not so swiftly on, to our second point, and that is China-Japan tensions rise to dangerous levels. Now, both Glenn and I are great admirers of Japan, and both Glenn and I have an interest in East Asia. Glenn's wife is Chinese, and I have traveled around China back in the day, and so we have some familiarity with East Asia. Let's get through the facts first. The Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi declared in Parliament that an attack on Taiwan by China's People's Liberation Army would create, and quote, a situation threatening Japan's survival, unquote. So, this is something, we have a timeline on our LinkedIn FOI page. Glenn is a senior partner there. I'm a partner, which is geopolitical risk, about the recent tensions. But the important thing is about this statement is she's made overt what Japanese diplomats, intelligence officials, and military officers have hitherto said in private. And what have they said in private? Well, perhaps Japan could intervene militarily if China invades Taiwan, exercising collective self-defense. Now, why is this? Why is this important? Why is this emotional? The Japanese ruled Taiwan from 1895 to 1945, often forgotten. The Chinese view the takeover of Taiwan as the first step in Japanese imperial expansion. Okay? And they have never quite forgiven or forgotten this act. Japan came late to the party. Japan learned from the West, studied the West, and Japan decided in the 19th century it needed to industrialize, it needed to modernize, and it needed to imperialize. And the sudden expansion doctrine of 19th century Japan aimed to turn Taiwan into a showpiece model colony. And yes, of course, they did make efforts in improving the economy, some public works, industry, but there was also a cultural Japanization of the island, and that is what the Taiwanese being so proud, the Chinese being so proud resent. And then, of course, the Chinese have memories of the long Japanese occupation of the mainland as well, the rape of Nanjing, and so on and so forth. And so the Beijing communist regime has asked Japan to fully repent for its war crimes, stop playing with fire on the Taiwan question, and now we have a full-blown diplomatic crisis. China suspects Japan to remilitarize. In the latest that you can see that Japan is going to deploy missiles on an island near Taiwan. China has criticized it. Emotion in Chinese social media is running really high. There is, as we well know, massive rise in Chinese nationalism over the last few years. For a while, there was wolf warrior diplomacy as well. We've covered that in the past. And apart from rhetoric, what has happened is that China has suspended processing visas for Japanese travelers. It has warned its citizens against visiting Japan. Now, note, Chinese tourism is a major source of revenue for Japanese airlines, hotels, and retail stores. Obviously, they will suffer. Japan has also warned its citizens in China about their safety as the crisis deepens. Note that Japan has a lot of investment in China. Japan has scrambled aircraft after detecting a suspected Chinese drone near its southern island of Yonaguni. This is close to Taiwan. The economic impact of all of this is significant. According to Japan's Ministry of Finance, the country's net foreign direct investment into mainland China fell by 30.6% in the first 3 quarters of 2025. This is the lowest amount since the data series began. According to a poll by the Japanese Chamber of Commerce in China, only 10% of the 8,300 firms responding said they planned to increase investments. So fundamentally, we know that the crisis is military, the crisis is diplomatic, the crisis could be military, not yet. There are only deployments and scrambling of jets, and the crisis is certainly economic. So why do we have this crisis? Well, at the heart of this crisis, at the heart of this dispute, are two contrasting worldviews. The Chinese Communist Party considers the one China policy its holy grail. It views Taiwanese declaration of independence and support for Taiwan's independence as a direct threat to China's sovereignty. Also, as people point out, it may be a cynical play for popularity because at the end of the day, the CCP is no longer communist, or maybe it is, but not in the traditional way. And so it is now become the repository of Chinese nationalism and, of course, returning of the Middle Kingdom to its former glory. And therefore, the Chinese rhetoric against Takaichi, both from the regime and in social media, has been extremely aggressive. Now, what is Japan's view of Taiwan? Japan views Taiwan as a de facto independent state. And Japan is increasingly nervous about China as an aggressive revisionist power. Tokyo views a Chinese threat to Taiwan as a risk to Japan's national security. And if the Chinese were to control Taiwan, then many of the islands Japan claims and indeed owns would be very close to Taiwan and would be threatened by the People's Liberation Army or the Navy of the People's Liberation Army. And note, and this is where Glenn and I can say that we were certainly ahead of the curve. In 2020, when a Chinese and Russian fleet circumnavigated Honshu Island, Glenn. Remember, we covered it, we analyzed it in some detail. That was largely overlooked by most geopolitical analysts. Certainly in Washington, it never got the press it deserved. It didn't get the press in London or Paris or Berlin. And we said at the time that this is going to be a wake-up call and a shake-up, because this is like the equivalent of someone waving a gun and walking outside your front door. And of course, the Japanese have increased their defense spending. They have abandoned self-imposed restraint. Yes, of course, the yen has depreciated substantially against the dollar, meaning that the increase is not as substantive as it would have been. And demography, of course, is a constraint. So there are barriers to military development, but yet it is very clear, and we have friends such as General Hiroyuki Sugoi, the former defense attaché of Japan. You can see there's a new determination in Japan to invest in defense, to prepare against threats. And they also realize they can't rely on America anymore. So they have to beef up, for want of a better word. They have to do their push-ups. They have to do their pull-ups. They have to get their weapons. They have to prepare. And the Japanese are tired of being lectured to and tired of living in post-World War II guilt. They say, a lot of them think 80 years of saying sorry is enough. And some would say, the Chinese would say, they haven't said sorry properly enough. They still have that war shrine that is very controversial. But on the whole, the Japanese say that, look, we've been extremely well behaved for 80 years. Yes, we were wrong 80 years ago, but now it is not us, it is the Chinese who are the provocateurs. And if we don't act now, then we will be not just second fiddle, but we will have our national security and indeed our sovereignty at threat. Over to you, Glenn, your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I think I'll take your palette and paint a picture with slightly different colors. Not contradictory ones, but slightly different. One should always think of Chinese nationalism as a spigot that is in Beijing, controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, which really means by Xi Jinping. And the Chinese regime made a pretty explicit pact or promise to the Chinese people that we will allow you to get rich and you will support the state, which means the Chinese Communist Party. Whether it be communist in substance or not is actually secondary at this point. And so the government turns up quite consciously the nationalist flame, or I'm mixing my metaphors, I suppose, when it needs to or feels it wants to exert international pressure on Japan in this instance, or rally support for the position of the Beijing government. The problem is that this spigot, I'll go back to my liquid metaphor, can be opened or closed, but the tub into which the nationalist liquid pours has no drain pipe, no emergency offlet, or whatever you call it, and it can overflow and it can become uncontrollable. So this anti-Japanese sentiment, when there have been many interviews and assessments by Chinese scholars, when you can find a Chinese official or an informed Chinese who can speak candidly, most of them will acknowledge, well, it's just the points you made, Atul. It's been 80 years, and the Japanese aren't so bad anymore, and this is all a cynical tactic that we're using, and sometimes we can't control it. So there's an element to that.
My ex Chinese girlfriend, who was at Oxford with me, loved the Japanese. She used Japanese cosmetics. She thought Japan was extraordinarily organized. Her idea of fun was going off to Japan from China. And so a lot of the Chinese, educated Chinese, love the Japanese. They think the Japanese are organized, courteous, cultured, and that is all true. And off the record, even many of the Chinese officials will say that actually the Japanese are quite impressive. And the Japanese often will say similarly nice things. They won't say that they are organized, of course. No one is as organized as the Japanese, but the Japanese have a lot of respect for Chinese entrepreneurial energy, for the speed of decision making, for the scale of change. And the relationship economically is certainly symbiotic. Over to you, Glenn.
Yeah, so the nationalist anger on the part of China is a tool often being used, but one that they can lose control of. And the dynamics are that the prime minister of Japan is a disciple of Shinzo Abe. And what she said and what the Chinese are in high dudgeon about right now is really no different than what Abe said and what she has said for many years. The Chinese have chosen to make an issue of this more, in part because the Japanese are realizing that they cannot rely on the United States. They are increasing their own defense capabilities and do view Chinese actions as, if not existential, dramatically significant substantive threats to the sovereignty, the wealth, independence of Japan. And that's even more than the Taiwan issue, the issues in the South China and South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits. China's interpretation of its sovereignty extends right up, literally, to within several kilometers of the shores of the Philippines and all the other states in the South China Sea and East China Seas, which is 1,500 kilometers and more from the Chinese coast. The Chinese will give you all sorts of spurious or half serious explanations as to why that has some historical basis, which is all very debatable. But that's a fact.
Glenn, very quickly to support your point. Before the communists, the nationalists had an 11-dot line. The Chinese CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, reduced it to a 9-dot line. And now they've increased it to a 10-dot line. So you can see that this is not just a communist problem. This is a Chinese nationalism problem. By the way, the nationalists moved to Taiwan after they lost the Civil War. So this is really a Chinese nationalist issue. It's a very expansionist claim.
And the Chinese are denouncing Japan's militarism and blaming Japan for the comments of its prime minister and its increased defense budget, when in fact the Chinese are moving to resolve the ambiguity of the Taiwan situation, which means to absorb it. They have increased by, I think, an order of magnitude the number of overflights and launching of missiles on the eastern side, the Pacific side of Japan, or around Taiwan, etc., conducting exercises with now the largest navy in the world around Taiwan. Those are the changes to the status quo to which Japan is responding, rather than China responding to an increasingly aggressive Japan, as Beijing characterizes the case. So that's actually the dynamic.
To be fair, very quickly, to be fair, Takaichi is a nationalist. Takaichi, yes. Sanai Takaichi does want a stronger Japan, and Takaichi is more up for a bish bash bosh than her predecessors. She's the daughter of a policeman, motorcycle rider, or fast car driver, played in a rock band. She's a different kettle of fish to the other leaders. After all, she's the first woman prime minister of Japan.
I don't know. I think she's been a mainstream LDP politician. If Abe was different from the predecessors, and he was, then she is. That's true. Certainly, Japan is more
shift to the right.
Assertive.
That is also true in Japan.
Certainly, it's more in a more assertive Japan in a more dangerous environment. So anyway, that's the different coloration that I would place on it. We're going far too long. Brilliant. Fascinating as Japan is.
Let's get to number 3. Our topic for November 2025: rising concerns over stock market bubble. So, Albert Edwards, a name people in the markets know well, a global strategist at Société Générale, a French bank, which I'm sure Peter Isaacson knows well, and I suspect so do you, Glenn, quite a big bank. He has raised a red flag on the current state of the US equity market. He believes that the market, largely driven by tech and AI, is in the throes of a dangerous bubble. This could have dire consequences. Edwards points to soaring valuations of tech companies, some trading at 30 times forward earnings. This is a ridiculous figure. He also argues that consumer spending is being driven far more than usual by the top quintile of wealthy Americans. So the economy is actually more vulnerable than during previous bubbles. Our own managing partner, Sanjay Acharya, has been running the numbers. He has been warning about the concerning signals suggesting major economic difficulty. He's not the only one. Bank bosses to the International Monetary Fund are warning about stratospheric valuations of America's tech companies. I'll give you one figure, which JP Morgan Chase came up with. For a 10% return on AI capex, which is capital expenditure, projected by 2030, these companies will need $650 billion of annual AI revenues. That is the equivalent of $400 per year from every iPhone user. And a lot of investors believe that this is a ridiculous figure. Now, we think when you look at figures of debt, US debt will soon exceed that of Italy's and Greece. Italy's and Greece's for the first time in the 21st century. We know the dollar is depreciating. We know inflation is rising again. We know tariffs are starting to bite. Glenn, you were going to make that point about that lag factor of tariffs. Do so now before I carry on.
Right. Yeah, not only tariffs, but there's been a lot of comment about, gosh, the tariffs haven't had any effect, of course, which the Trump administration is saying, well, I told you everything would be perfect and, the sun would rise even at sunset. That's simply ignoring the fundamental facts that the smallest rise in interest rates, the shortest term interest rates, take, if you increase those rates, it takes about 6 months to see any effect in the economy. The longer term rates, bonds and so on, and Fed funds and all this that have terms of 5 and 10 years take about 18 months. Changes in fiscal policy don't affect the economy immediately. Changes in the tax rate, the monetary policy, it all takes from 6 to 18 months to start to show effect. That's only now. It's been 1 year since the president took office, since Trump took office.
Not quite. He took power in January. Not
even a year.
January.
Correct. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Not even a year. And it's only been, 5 months or something since he announced his incoherent and constantly changing, quote, policy, unquote. So nothing has really had a chance to affect directly, other than through fear and confusion, the fundamental factors of the economy. That is only now beginning to be the case. And in every case, every instance, you can take housing costs, unemployment rate, exchange rate, tariff rate, deficit size, construction investment, on and on and on and on and on. All of the indicators are bad, meaning that there are increasing strains in the economy and that a recession is increasingly likely.
Yes, and we send our FOI geopolitical risk monitor. We sent it out for November, and you can take a look at the numbers. Sanjay did a lot of data crunching, and yes, Glenn is right. Recent data does support the Trump administration views. Tariff revenue has jumped, but imports and exports have held steady. But that is, they are not recent data does not account for future data because of the time lag factor. Basically, our sources in the U.S. Treasury are worried. In fact, one of my dear friends who's retired from the U.S. Treasury has been really worried, and exactly along the same lines, exactly for the same reasons as Glenn. He says, number one, the tariffs as the Trump administration has imposed are not such a good idea. And number two, the arbitrary way in which they have been imposed are going to lead to decision paralysis at the CEO level, because you have no certainty. So how do you make all these business decisions, which basically you have to, all of these decisions play out over time, and that'll lead to uncertainty. Also, he worries about, and our sources in the Treasury, and this is, it's not rocket science. Everybody is worrying about the cost of living crisis and affordability issues. And demand, let's assume, even if the AI bubble was to take off, even if production went up miraculously, AI could produce things in plenty, pencils and notebooks. Let's assume the AI would optimize the distribution of everything. Even then, when you are getting rid of jobs, when Amazon is using robots instead of people, when you are seeing massive dislocation in the economy, you are in a situation similar to the 1920s, wherein there was a lot of boom, there were radio stocks and whatnot. But the big question is, where will the demand come from? Eventually, arguably, the economy will adjust, new jobs will emerge, yada, yada, but there is a lag factor there as well. And in between, obviously, we remember 1929, Andrew Ross Sorkin has written a book, 1989, which has basically become the rage in America. And so we are not being original. Everyone and their dog seems to be predicting a crash. But the reality of the matter is that the talk, just because there's a lot of talk about it, doesn't mean that it is all talk. It is a reality that we are waiting for Godot. We are waiting for a crash. And the University of Michigan regular tracking of consumer confidence for November came up with a score of 50.3, the second worst score ever. So on the whole, things are not looking good. And even when it comes to the dollar remains the currency of trade, but investors, central banks and treasuries are diversifying away from the currency. So multiple indicators point to a crashed stock market, high prices, weak employment, and a depreciating dollar. We've been very
Well,
cheery,
look,
Glenn.
the economy relies upon the average consumer fundamentally to grossly simplify. And what are the facts? That the stock market increase is 60% of the stock market's increase is attributable to the seven magnificent AI high-tech computer related firms. 40% of it is for the remainder of the stock market, which it's up, but not significantly. Most of the wealth, something like 80%, 86% of the tax cuts, so the increase in de facto income has gone to the top 1% of the American financial population. The bottom 80% is at best, has been for years, economically stagnant. No increase in disposable income or national wealth. Unemployment for the 18 to 25, I think it is, for the youngest people entering the workforce, is above 8%. And the lag time to seek a job is higher than it has been in years. Those are the elements that would drive an economy. All of them are stagnant and getting worse, other than the rich people who have private airplanes and go to the Met Gala.
The Magnificent Seven that Glenn has referred to are Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta Platforms, Microsoft, Nvidia, and Tesla. So these have cornered the bulk of the economy. These people who own their shares have earned the most. And there is an argument that an entrepreneur was making just before I got on this call, that the balance has shifted between corporates and entrepreneurs. Forget corporates and consumers. Corporates and entrepreneurs. It has become more and more difficult to be an entrepreneur. And importantly, for every economy, just as Glenn said, it is the average consumer. For any economy, whether Germany with its Mittelstand, whether it is here, it is the smaller firms that come up with the innovation, that come up with employment, that come up with the dynamism to the economy. And in some ways, America is becoming, or has become, an oligopolistic economy with very little competition. And that is worrying. And on that note, Glenn, I think we've come, final words, perhaps.
Oh, well, just, 1,000 billionaires cannot buy as many cars as 100 million lower middle class Americans. And if that's the case, and it is, the economy will stagnate if the lower middle class and middle class can't buy them.
On that note, happy Thanksgiving to all our American viewers, and happy holidays to all our non-American viewers. We will see you, and on all the best with everything. See you in December.
We'll talk about Kafka next time and find reality.
Indeed. Cheerio.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.